Like my mom still to this day, I go to Texas every June for her birthday. And I ask her, Mom, what do you want for your birthday? And without fail, she says, I want to go to Longhorn Steakhouse. It's this realization for me of changing consumer habits is incredibly difficult.
Hey guys, this is Mike and welcome to the podcast. On today's show, I talked to Arturo Elizondo, the CEO of Every Company, who, as he says in his intro, he is making animal proteins without animals using technologies like precision fermentation to essentially create egg proteins and egg replacements. Arturo knew from the early days he didn't want to create a product that was sold directly to consumers, but instead to help food manufacturers and others sidestep what is normally a very chaotic supply chain for eggs. Oh, and by the way, help us relieve our dependence on animal agriculture. As you may hear from the birds chirping, I'm doing this remotely as we put out this podcast. I hope you're having a great Thanksgiving if you are celebrating that, and we'll talk to you all soon. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I am Arturo, founder and CEO of the Every Company. We make animal proteins without using animals, specifically focusing on egg proteins as functional ingredients. We're a B2B company that effectively delivers egg proteins to the world's largest food companies.
And you guys had some big news this week. Can you share with us what happened?
Yeah, we had two big pieces of news that we lumped together. We closed our Series D for $55 million, and we announced that in tandem with a national rollout of our ingredients in Walmart.
And from what I understand, that's going to be in every Walmart in the country, right?
Yeah, it right now is. You can go to any Walmart in the country today.
This isn't like, hey, someday we'll be in a Walmart. We have an agreement where we'll go step by step. You guys are actually in every Walmart.
Yeah, you can go right now. You can buy it online as well on Walmart.com, buy it on Amazon. It's rolled out nationwide, and we're working on a few more additional SKUs very soon as well.
When I go into Walmart, where am I finding this? And what is it? Is it every egg? Or what does it say?
Yeah, so it's not a consumer facing product in terms of we are powering. We're the egg replacer, the ingredient powering the products, and so you won't actually see our name. We have effectively evolved to be a full pure ingredient
B2B
supplier.
ingredient company. Okay,
exactly. What I will say is we are it's a baked good, and it's a traditional baked good. So it's not labeled as vegan, it's not labeled as animal free, it's not labeled as any of that. You won't, unless you're actually reading the ingredient pack, you will not know that we are powering those products. And I think that is ultimately our vision of becoming the world's biggest food company that no one has ever heard of.
And that decision to pivot towards being an exclusive behind the scenes B2B company, when did you make that decision to go exclusively behind the scenes?
Well, it was realizing that one is that we had a path towards making the unit economics work at scale. Yeah. Like ultimately, we knew that if we weren't able to compete on cost, there would have to be some brand that could support a higher price product. And so when we realized, hey, look, for us, we have now line of sight, and a big part of that has been manufacturing, right? Which has been probably the bane of every company's existence in our industry. That is ultimately the biggest lever to unlock low costs that actually compete at scale. And so for us, once we locked that in and we realized, and our technology was mature enough that when dropped into a larger scale facility, the numbers really worked, is now the name of the game was how do we start driving scale to the platform and start eating into customer accounts more aggressively. And the most frictionless path possible was to not to be the ingredient that is not where customers don't have to change the label, don't have to change the packaging on the front end, and that's ultimately what inspired us to make the transition. That was number one, and then number two is realizing ultimately that the value proposition of the product, like leaning into the fundamentals. Like it's not about vegan, it's not about animal free, it's not about sustainability. Like what these customers are worried about is they want to not get screwed over whenever there's an avian flu spike. There are supply shortages. For many of these companies, like egg is one of the 100 ingredients that they're using, but it's the one with the worst supply chain. And so if we can completely eliminate that question mark for them and say, hey, look, you can now source it in the exact same way that you source all your other 100 ingredients, and you never have to worry about what the price of eggs is that week, or whether there's an avian flu or not. That peace of mind is worth something to these customers. And so that we decided to just lean in heavily on the unsexy parts of being a B2B ingredient supplier.
And for those listening to the podcast who don't know what your technology is or how you're making essentially an egg replacement, or how you're creating an animal identical protein, how do you explain this to someone at a dinner party, like what you make versus like an egg that comes for a chicken?
Yeah. The way that I explain it is mainly explaining it the way that, the products that people are already consuming or aware of. So it's the same process used to make insulin, to make rennet, to make a lot of the products that, a lot of enzymes and detergents and vitamins, amino acids, where we use microorganisms that naturally produce protein. And then we effectively feed them the DNA that codes for specific proteins. In this case, egg proteins. And we ferment them and we put them in large scale fermenters, similar to the way that yeast converts sugar into alcohol to make beer and wine. Our yeast converts sugar into protein. And then when we feed it the egg protein DNA sequences, it basically spits out the egg protein. And that's how that's how a lot of products are already made today. And we use effectively the same technology, but apply it to a new set of proteins.
You've told this and used this explanation, I think, a few times in the past decade. I think you're pretty good at it at this point. So this unlock of scale, can you talk a little bit about that? Was there a point in time or an unlock where you were said, hey, the science works at a much bigger scale of production to where we can get it to the price points that will meet these big manufacturers where they need to be if they're a bakery or they're a Walmart or whatever?
So when we raised our last round, we had proven the scalability of our proteins at in the 40, 50,000 liters scale.
Okay.
One of the things that was for two of our proteins over the course of the last couple of years, we have, but it was also like suboptimal. What we did ultimately was, we worked with one of my manufacturing partners and proven and scaled both of our major egg proteins at over 100,000 liters. And we made metric tons of product and started shipping that to customers, doing all the consumer trials, all of the industrial trials, getting strong validation from the customer base that the product works, that the labeling works, that it performs well with the other ingredients in the formulations, and that there is scalability across multiple different categories. That gave us the conviction to then double down, and currently we're manufacturing in Europe. We're doing that at scale today, and it's enough capacity to start seeding the large accounts. And then later next year, we'll be onboarding a second manufacturer in the US to build redundancy in our supply chain.
You mentioned Europe, and this is for manufacturing only. Is there still some resistance, maybe regulatory or just overall, against precision fermentation in Europe because it's GMO? Are they viewed as GMO?
Yeah. So in Europe, we're not selling the product because
that's what I wondered.
Long term, but there are a lot of manufacturers out there, especially that are set up as contract manufacturers. In the US,
sure,
there's a lot of manufacturing capacity, but not enough contract manufacturers, and so there is that imbalance.
So you talked about how you started almost framing things different, I think, around how this can be an alternative to the unstable supply chain due to things like avian flu, et cetera. When did this framing with regards to your potential customers start to change? Were you just seeing things like COVID and the breaking of the supply chains and you just needed to start positioning it different and they were very receptive to it? Or
I think it was twofold. One is the technology was mature enough and we now had line of sight towards the economics actually work at scale. There's a long-term viable business. That was like number one. And then number two is the avian flu hit last year and then into the beginning of this year. And we started getting calls everywhere. And with the customers we were sampling, everybody wanted to sample the product. And so we got a ton of customer validation, and we're able to really use that opportunity to hone in on the value proposition, how we sell in to customers, and realizing ultimately that stability and supply chain, at least in the egg space, right? I can't speak for the other pockets of the food industry, but for eggs, they are a nightmare for food companies to work with. And depending on the scale, like there are some massive bakeries out there today that are buying tubs of liquid egg that is refrigerated, that has like a 1 to 2 month shelf life. And so what we do is then we tell them, hey, try this product, 18-month shelf life, powder. You can mix in with your dry ingredients, and it is a much cleaner sell. And by the way, you never have to worry about eggs ever again. And so that was a value proposition that our customers could really get behind.
So talk about working with some of these big bakeries, these big suppliers and retailers like Walmart. Was there a lot of like working with them in the formulation side, spending some time with their food scientists, and then ultimately coming out on the other side and then being, hey, this actually works pretty well. This is like a true egg replacement. Can you talk about that process?
Fortunately, we have many food companies that are our investors. So we're able to work really closely with the product development teams and get feedback pretty early on in the process. But then to your point, then when we're selling with to customers, usually the larger companies are pretty sophisticated. And so our teams, kind of like nerd to nerd, they can really work easily with our teams. And so there is some initial, we sample the product, our product teams are able to connect. We're able to explain to them how they can use it differently the way that they would normally use conventional eggs. Some companies are looking actually more for redundancy, where they're not looking to remove eggs altogether, but they're looking to hedge their supply chains and to build redundancy. And so that's slightly different. Fortunately, our products also work very synergistically with eggs. And so I think part of it is really being very tuned into what is a customer actually looking for, and then based off of that, leaning into like a blend or leaning into a single ingredient solution.
I feel like the precision fermentation companies like you and others are in a much better place than we saw, I think, the cultivated meat company, for example, because of, I think, the resistance to that technology from the general public. And then obviously the plant-based meat companies. So do you feel like you guys were in a better spot ultimately of 3 or 4 different alt protein technologies when you compare?
I do think there are some very clear advantages, like structural advantages to fermentation in particular, that you don't have to build state-of-the-art facilities. Like I know there's this whole narrative around there's not enough fermentation capacity. There actually is a lot of capacity out there. And we've been in the space. We're talking to almost every large manufacturing partner. The challenge is that all of these companies were competing for capacity, and so it drove up prices like crazy. Now that the space has cooled, that's actually been really helpful for us in particular, because we've been able to negotiate much more attractive manufacturing deals with partners. So like that's one big, I think, tailwind coming out of this, the cooling in the space. And then 2 is, the fact that we don't have to build capacity, be vertically integrated, I think gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how to build the business, especially in a world where you have to be really capital efficient and where we're not in the times of 2021. So I think that's number 2. And then number 3 is part of because we're going after a particular category that can flex as an ingredient, where, it's hard for some products, it kind of like they're not really used as ingredients, right? You can't really hide meat. Like meat is the product. With eggs, it's like the intel inside. And so they're in everything. And that I think gives us also a lot of flexibility to figure out, well, which pockets of the $270 billion egg market can we go after first, second, third? Is there enough room to play here on the B2B side without having to then spend all this money on the marketing front? That especially in a cash constrained world is tough to finance.
Yeah, and there's no marketing that has to be done to win over consumers that's a lot of spend if you're going to be a consumer-facing product.
Yeah, and that was always, to be honest, I mean, I'm Mexican and I'm from Texas. like my mom still to this day, I go to Texas every June for her birthday. And I ask her, Mom, what do you want for your birthday? And without fail, she says, I want to go to Longhorn Steakhouse.
Yeah.
And it's this realization for me of, it's like changing consumer habits. Like she's been buying the same bread at the grocery store, HEB in Texas, for the last 20 years, the same exact bread every single week. And realizing that like changing consumer habits is incredibly difficult. And so as much as we want to tell different stories, right, and I think that there's really great reasons why we want these products to succeed, at the end of the day, what I wanted to build the business around is, and ultimately the long-term strategy had always been, how do we revamp the back end of food production without compromising or changing the consumer experience? And that's where we can become this hidden giant that can work in the back end, and no one, that consumers don't have to wrestle with like, oh, okay, well, this brand has different colors. This is a different value proposition. In the day, we're more of a supply chain solution more than a consumer solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Food with your mom, it's part of people's cultural identity. I feel like some of these habits are going to go to people's graves with them. People are not going to give up meat if they feel like that's part of what they want to eat. They want to go to steakhouse every birthday, right? So
I think especially being stuck in the political zeitgeist, right?
Yeah,
like that, where like food, it's unfortunate how politicized food becomes. And it's like, how do we just avoid getting in the crosshairs, because no one wins in those, in those battles. And so look, we're here to do a job, and fortunately we can do that by just keeping our head down.
Sometimes being a boring ingredient company really is the way to go, right? Because no one's paying attention, and you could just make money.
Yeah, exactly. Boring is a new sexy.
So we were talking in the pre-chat about how, you guys go way back. I feel like you're one of the OG old protein companies that were there at the pretty early stages of the big wave out of Silicon Valley. You were in that early IndieBio cohort. At that time, were you thinking ever of doing a consumer-facing brand, or were you always like, hey, I want to be a boring ingredient company?
The long-term vision had always been to be that boring ingredient company. However, the path to getting there was a question mark. Again, because when we grew up in that space of, where there was a lot of funding available, is that companies were able to compete for capacity, and then that jacked up the price in a way that didn't make the business viable. Like for any of us, you had to go after these insanely high value but small volume products to actually get a workable business in biotech. And that, even our proteins, like our egg proteins, just have a certain price point in the market that they command, even in some of these higher value segments. And so we knew ultimately that the goal was ultimately to get to become this boring ingredient company on the back end. But how we get there, and would we have to build some consumer facing components to the business on our path there? And I think now, and part of I think what has been very helpful is with the cooling of the market plus the maturity of our technology is that we've been able to feel really much more comfortable with, hey, there's actually a real path here as a B2B ingredient company where we can become a big successful business.
I have to say, though, the macaron cookies you made were pretty tasty. I think a couple of years ago that you're using, I think, to kind of show the value or the proof of your eggs really makes sense. So.
Yeah. I mean, also because I think a lot of people didn't know it was possible. Like for most of these companies, as of today, out of the $270 billion egg market, less than 1% is dominated by, it's dominated by anything other than eggs. And so eggs are like this perfect food, and it's this function. It's this functional powerhouse. And so to say that you can actually match or even outperform the egg, especially in some of these incredibly delicate applications, was like a very outlandish statement. I remember a lot of companies being like, there's no way you can do that. Like the egg is perfect. Like, and it is like, we've been trying to replace it for years, right? Because avian foods are not new. And whenever there's an avian flu, all these companies try to reformulate, but they realize they can't because these proteins are incredibly functional and you can't get rid of the egg. And so what do? You pass on the cost to the consumers or you absorb the higher cost. And now, we can come in and provide that solution that wasn't possible before. But I think those proof points are really critical for us to show this is what this can do. And these are the proof points. We can go after the hardest, most technically difficult applications. And that way, if we can go after the peak, means that we can, ultimately, we can kind of play wherever we want. And that allows us to build, I think, the most sustainable business.
We may have talked about this at some point, but I don't think our listeners have ever heard your story. But how did you come up with this idea? What was the genesis? Were you sitting there at some point and said, hey, I want to create an alternative egg company? Was there, I think you had a co-founder, right? I think you guys had a couple co-founders, but what was there a conversation in a bar? What happened?
I was at the USDA. I was an intern in DC, and I was in the sub-agency that regulates every meat processing and slaughterhouse facility in the country. And I realized how scalable animal protein production is. I know we as a space like to say it's it's really inefficient and it's horrible and it's not scalable, but there's a reason why animal proteins dominate our food system today. And we've made them and we've perfected that art to a T. So my realization was, well, in order for us to have a shot at transforming our food system, is that we would need to have a technology and an approach that could compete at the cost and scale of the incumbent industry. And so that was the lens that I used to then inform, well, what technologies and what products out there actually fit those guardrails. I then booked a one-way ticket to San Francisco. I had no job. I had no place to stay. I was like, I want to do something in this space. And this is the only place in the world people are funding crazy ideas. Because back then, there weren't any companies. It was like Impossible had just started. Perfect Day had just gotten their seed round. Beyond Meat was in SoCal, and Hampton Creek now just was making their mayo. So I knew that there was something here. I didn't know what that was going to look like. And then I went to this food tech conference where I met Isha from New Harvest and Dave Anshel, my co-founder, and then actually the Perfect Day guys who were then Move Free. And Dave had this crazy idea of making eggs without chickens.
Everyone had a different name back then.
Yeah, exactly. So part of the growing up journey. But it was this realization that he had this idea of like, well, why fermentation has been, is already being deployed to make these different kinds of products. There are companies already in our space using it. Why don't we use it to go after a completely new set of proteins? In this case, the egg proteins. And when I kind of went in and looked at how mature this technology was, and also the day we founded the company, actually, the first day of IndieBio, one of the largest pasta companies in the world came to us and said, we've been trying to get rid of eggs for a long time. They're so expensive. They're really hard to work with. They do this. They didn't mention anything about animal free or veganism or sustainability. And that's when I knew, and then since then we had a lot of other companies come to us and tell us like, look, these are a pain to work with, that then gave us confidence to say, this is really a great mix of the technology being there. It's been around for 40 years, right? We're now applying the same old technology to a new class of proteins, but this protein set is actually really problematic, the conventional way of producing it. So there's really something there that we can go after.
And that was circa 2014, 2015. You made that flight, and
exactly.
And then you went from a meeting at a food tech conference to founding a company in probably just a month or two at that point.
Yeah. So IndieBio was getting started in Silicon Valley, 2015, and Perfect Day had just got in through it in Ireland, and Isha from New Harvest, recommended the program for us to do in San Francisco. And so my co-founder Dave and I, built a business plan and then wrote, the tech plan at a coffee shop, submitted with an idea on paper, and but again, like the fundamentals were there. Like there was a market there. The proteins could be, we felt pretty confident we could make it happen because it was a technology that had been around for decades.
Yeah.
We carried it could work. And then we ultimately then used it to build our prototype.
So from an intern at the USDA to essentially a technology founder that now you've raised probably over $200 million at this point. I think you raised your C was like 150 or so.
Yeah.
And this last year. So did you ever think you would be this Silicon Valley based, food tech founder, when you're working for the USDA?
Not at all. I had no desire to be a founder. I had no desire to be biotechnology, to start a company. I never thought that this would be my life. But what I did know is that I wanted to find the most efficient and effective path at transforming our food system. And that became like, I know that is my life's mission. Like, and I know it, I feel it so deeply that this is what I'm meant to do on this planet. And now my work is what's the best way to do that? And on the USDA side, what was very helpful for me is regulating it is one piece of it. But actually, regulating the problem is one side of the equation. But what if we built a completely different solution for it? And I'd rather be on the solution side because it's where I actually can own the end product in our own destiny, and that felt really exciting. But so it was more around this in my having looked at the whole ecosystem where we're sitting. I think we have the best shot at making making it and making a big change.
It's interesting because I feel like folks like you, Paul Shapiro, for example, who were just driven by a passion, right? This was like something where they knew was your overarching goal in life, that you wanted to reduce the reliance on animal agriculture, find a new way to kind of build the system around. You're persisting still, like the companies are still going strong. We talked a little bit on the pre-show about how the old protein market overall has gone through this, what I would call the trough of disillusionment, to use like a Gardner term. I feel like there's a little bit of hope now. I feel like there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and companies like yourself that have gotten to this point, it definitely feels like you're going to survive and maybe make a big difference.
Yeah. Thank you. I really hope so. And I believe it. Like I've been in it now long enough. I mean, it's been 9+ years. Like you to your point, we've ridden.
You don't have any gray hair yet. Maybe
well, fortunately, I was very green, and that naivete actually served me very well then, because I think if I knew then what I know now, I'm not sure I would have signed up for this because of just like it's hard. And also, like, it was a dream. Like, we didn't know if this was possible. Like, back then, no one had ever done this. No one had ever proven this. Like, we were, to your point about being part of the first wave. Part of the first wave is you are in this realm of, is it possible or impossible? And like, you actually don't know the answer. And we didn't know if biology could get there. No one had ever done that before. We didn't know if this was, none of these puzzle pieces were in place. And I think now what gives me comfort is we have the benefit of time and proof that gives us an ability to underwrite our vision, like with a degree of candor and like reality and level-headedness that gives me a lot of comfort that, okay, this is a sound business. It's a sound plan. And at the end of the day, to make a difference in the world, you have to be a real company. You have to be a real business, and the numbers have to work. And that's been, and that gives me a lot of comfort and energy.
Yeah. I'll revisit what I just said. I feel like the passion has been there and is there. And I think that was a driving force, you guys, but also you made some good choices early on. I feel like being in an ingredient company, not going down the path of being a consumer facing brand, because by and large, those guys have had a really hard time. That's, like we said, it's hard to change people's habits because it's tied to their cultural identity. And so that that was some smart decision making up front.
Yeah, that was very helpful, and I think that also helped me as a non-technical founder, which is that I could kind of look at the space very coldly, where I was like, I'm not wedded to one particular technology or one particular product set. Like, what do the numbers say? And I kind of did like the McKinsey, business analysis of like, okay, is the technology there? Has it been scaled before? Like, where are the risks in the tech stack, right? And like, how doable is this? And then on the market, do customers actually want something like this? Is there a real pain point there? Like, do we have to, is there a B2B component versus B2C? Because I think part of that is also the cultural background of, like, I'm not in the business of trying to change people's minds. I know how hard that is. I live it every day, with my family in Texas. And I don't want to, for me, that's not the game I want to play. I want to scale as big as possible. And I think the most effective way to do that is by working with the largest food companies in the world and enabling, working with them by solving a very simple problem, which is you're buying eggs right now, buy it from us at a penny cheaper. And no, by the way, you'll never see a price fluctuation again. And that's clean.
Do you think that in 5 years, 10 years from now, a lot of these products that use eggs will have converted, like a significant percentage of products that bake and use eggs will have converted just because of the instability or the more stability you bring to like what is otherwise unstable supply chain?
I 100% believe that. And I think and particularly because this is not getting any better. Our supply chain our avian flu is not going away. If you look at the patterns over the last 50 years of the frequency of pandemics, of zoonotic diseases, of avian flu, you'll see the intensification. Like they used to happen every 7 to 10 years and every 5 to 7, and now it's every 2 to 3 years. They're happening, and they're becoming much more viral and spread much faster, and actually start going. We started seeing for the first time it getting passed over to humans.
They're jumping species.
To polar bears, to animals, to penguins, and that's not, if anything, that's only going to intensify. And so I do think that the supply chain fragility of our current food system is what ultimately is going to start forcing companies like we're seeing right now, where they have to just rethink their supply chains for not just the next 12 months, but for the next 5 years.
Any final thoughts? Having been in this for a decade makes you, believe it or not, one of the kind of the senior voices, I think, in the modern food tech ecosystem. Leading a successful company. You just raised your Series D. What advice would you give to other founders who are trying to make a significant impact, who maybe want to start a company in this world of food?
Yeah, I think number one is, I think to your earlier point, like how can you we do our homework up front around making one of the best advices that I got from actually Arvind at IndieBio when we started 10 years ago, and he said look, investors, you have to look at your business as because you're a deep tech company, how are you retiring risk, and how can you retire risk as quickly as possible so that you become investable. And I think that was, I think, a great lens to see, okay, well, how can we retire risk, and how do we actually start a company where we've tried to retire it as much as possible, so we don't have to innovate across so many dimensions. I think that is for any founder, how much how much homework can you do up front to know that you're standing on solid ground. And then, because it's a long journey, founding a company is 7 to 10 plus, especially in biotech, probably a 10 plus year journey. And so you have to, we're doing the work up front will give you at least the endurance, the belief to continue down that path. And then number two is there are pockets here. in the space where it really works. And it's not going to be every category, but there are going to be areas, glimmers of light within the food industry where this will work. And we only need one or two winners to really help change the narrative around this space, because especially from a long-term standpoint, the fundamentals are there. It's like hard to internalize some of these costs until they're there. And the egg industry is probably one of the first to like really feel it, right? The supply chain fragility, but that's true across a lot of different products. And so we were the first to feel it, but my expectation and my hope is that there will be other pockets. And so I think looking at those areas, I think will be key.
So I don't know if you have an answer for this. Kind of final question as we wrap up. There haven't been a lot of great exits in food tech. Yep. I feel like, maybe are you putting yourself in a category of a company that could have a decent exit? And are you thinking what that would look like? Are you going to, I don't know what your income statements look like, but are you looking to maybe go public, looking to get acquired, or just kind of be operating as a private company for a while?
Yeah. My number one objective is to build the best possible business to create as much optionality as possible for our long-term success. And I know that's a non-answer, but really it's like, hey, drive to profit. Like part of this round was we have a path to profitability that we are going to drive towards, and that we are driving towards. And so how do we make sure that one, we have the ability to own our own destiny, right? So we're not beholden to these hype cycles and, disillusionment cycles, et cetera, but that we have a business that stands on its own 2 feet. That's my number one objective. And then whether it's an IPO, liquidity, an acquisition, et cetera, we're going to keep our options open, but number one priority is to build the best possible business. And to your point, show that this fucking works, and that this space is worth believing in.
Hey, well, Arturo, always enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for spending time with me, man. Tell me what's going on and how the business is going. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate you having me.
Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, learning about how Arturo and every company is scaling the production of animal proteins without actually using animals. All right, folks, have a great day. Have a great Thanksgiving if you do celebrate, and everyone else have a great week as well. We'll talk to you all soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to give us a 5-star review. You'll find more content like this on thespoon.tech/podcasts.